and welcome to the Big Bear Homestead. Now that the weather's getting colder, it's time for us to start making our favorite treat here on the homestead. So today, we're making pumpkin roll. That's right, we're making pumpkin roll today. And before we get started, let's cover the things you're going to need. You're going to need pumpkin, of course, granulated sugar, vanilla extract, ground cinnamon, eggs, butter, cream cheese, salt, baking powder, all-purpose flour, and confectioner's sugar. And of course, you're going to need parchment paper and a 15 by 10 baking sheet. So, a little bit of history behind this pumpkin roll recipe. Years ago, when Jason and I met, his mother pulled me off to the side and said, I have a recipe for you. And I want you to have it because I know that if you and Jason ever get into any kind of issues and he's upset, you can make this recipe and everything in the world will be right again. So of course I wanted the recipe. Well, got the recipe, been making it for years, followed it, and it was very simple. There were just the list of ingredients, the temperature that I had to put the oven on. I think it may have had the description of the size of the pan that I needed, but it was just very quick and not very descriptive on how to make the recipe. Well, fast forward years later when we moved, and I lost the recipe. But I had made it so many times, I knew what the ingredients were for the most part. I wasn't sure about the baking powder or baking soda, and there's all these crazy things. So I started looking online, and I found the recipe again. But this time the recipe was a little bit more specific on the directions. So I decided to follow the directions and see what I got. And what I found was that these instructions are extremely important to making sure that you have a light, fluffy roll or cake as opposed to a very dense cake, which I had been making for years. So I'm going to share that with you today in hopes that you'll be able to make the same delicious treat that we have here every year. Now, I don't know about you, but when I get started making whatever I'm making in the kitchen, I like to be a little bit organized because sometimes the instructions might not tell you, make sure you have this ready or make sure that you preheat your oven. Sometimes it doesn't tell you that. So the very first thing that I make sure that I do is I preheat my oven, and we preheat it to 375 Fahrenheit. Then the next thing that we do is I take a baking sheet, and now here's where some of the instructions change. In the past, I used a 15 by 10 baking sheet, and we used to spray it down with cooking spray or oil it up with grease, whatever, to make sure that the cake didn't stick to the pan. Well, this year, right before Thanksgiving, J0 put out a video on how to make pumpkin roll. And of course I was curious because I was like, well, who makes better pumpkin roll than me? So of course I wanted to watch it. So I started watching, and one of the things that I noticed in his video is that he used parchment paper. I'd never used parchment paper before. I knew what it was, but I never really used it. So I watched his video to see how it worked with him. And he put the parchment paper out, and he even didn't line it all the way. He just said, it doesn't matter, you can kind of spill over a little, it's fine. But I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I like to have it completely on the pan. So I thought, this is a really cool idea, maybe I should try it. Well, fast forward just a little bit to Thanksgiving. We went up to Big Family Homestead, to their house for Thanksgiving, and so I was like, yeah, I gotta make my pumpkin roll. And so we did, and so I said, well, do you guys have parchment paper? And they're like, yeah, sure, of course we have it. So we pulled out a baking sheet, we put the parchment paper on there, and let me tell you, huge difference, guys, because as you'll see when we're making this, the cleanup is much easier. Normally, when I was rolling my cake roll, when we get ready to start putting everything together, I was using just a very thin bar towel. And the problem with that was the moisture from the cake and the heat, some of the cake would stay on the towel. And that's really hard for cleanup because then you have to wait for it to dry and it gets crusty and then we put it in the washing machine, it's a mess. So parchment paper, definitely a great idea. Thanks, John, for suggesting that. Pumpkin roll will never be the same here at the house. So anyway, get that done. The other thing that's important is you need 2 separate bowls. Now, I'm usually the kind of person, throw everything in one bowl and be done with it, but this is where the instructions for this cake roll make a huge difference. You need 2 separate bowls. You can use the same blender mixer, but I have a standing mixer and I have a hand mixer, so we're going to use both of those just to kind of keep everything quick. But you want a small bowl that you're going to mix your egg whites in, and then you have your big bowl that we're going to go ahead and put the yolks in. And we'll mix all of it separate, so you'll get to see how that happens in just a second. Okay, so our first step is going to be to separate the white from the yolk in the egg. Now, I don't know about you at your house, but here in our kitchen there are 2 things that are a waste of time, space, and money. And that would be the garlic press and the egg separator. Now, some people use the shell of the egg to separate the white from the yolk. I don't do that because I am notorious for getting pieces of the shell down into the bowl. And then you have to fish it out, and that's just another headache. So what do I use? My fingers. So, crack your egg, open it up, and then I just let the white go through my fingers, and I leave the yolk so that it just comes into my fingers, and that's all that's left. You'll see the white fall, and then the only thing that's left in there is the yolk. So then I'll take the yolk and I put that in our other bowl. We'll do that 2 more times. This is why I get chills. You see how horrible I am at cracking eggs? It's pretty bad. All right, so again, do the same thing. Now, when you're using farm fresh eggs, which we don't have right now because of the season, this is a lot easier to do. But even these are pretty good. The yolk is still pretty strong, so it'll usually hold up really good in your fingers. Put that down in there, and we got 1 more. Go through there until all you got left is the yolk. Put that in a bowl. And we're on to step 2 after I wash my hands. Okay, so now that we have the eggs separated, hands are nice and clean. The next step is going to be to beat the egg yolks. And you're going to beat them until they start to turn a nice light yellowish color. And then we're going to put in our sugar. So let's start that up. Gotta lift the bowl first. Okay, start it up. And then what you're gonna do is just gradually add your 1/2 cup of sugar. Okay, because the recipe asks for a full cup, but you're gonna split these up into 2 separate cups. So we're gonna start to gradually add that sugar in there. Okay, and then after you've done that, you're gonna take your pumpkin. And this is 2/3 of a cup of pumpkin. And then you're going to add that into your bowl as well. And again, not all at one time, just a little bit at a time so it mixes thoroughly. It'd help if I was using the right end. I love this nifty little tool that I bought, but sometimes the blonde comes out of me and I use the wrong side of the tool. Okay, so we've got all of the pumpkin in there and all of the sugar, and we're going to just ramp up the speed just a little bit so that it'll mix really well and the sugar will dissolve into the mixture. Okay, I think that's good to go. Now, the next step is going to be to go to the egg whites. Now, with the egg whites, we already have the 3 egg whites in the bowl. And like I said before, I'm going to go ahead and use my hand mixer so that I have a little bit more control over the eggs themselves, or the whites. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to beat the egg whites until you have soft peaks form. Okay, and then what you'll do is gradually add your sugar into your egg whites. Now, this is important. When I say gradually, I mean gradually. Don't just dump it in there. Pour a little bit at a time. Okay, so you want this to where it looks almost just short of meringue. And what I'm testing for is peaks. That's a nice consistency right there. And this is the part where I was talking about that is extremely important for this mixture to be nice and fluffy. Separating these, both the white and the yolk out, is what will make this recipe so much more appetizing. All right, the next step is to go ahead and start combining this, putting it all together. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your egg white mixture and we're going to fold that into the yolk mixture. So you're just going to kind of gently mix that together, fold it in there. And you can already see the consistency is so light and fluffy. It's pretty neat to just think about what that's going to look like when it turns into. And then we're just going to fold all of the mixture together. Then once you get that lightly mixed, then you're going to combine your flour and your baking powder, your cinnamon, and your salt. Now, the flour is 3/4 of a cup of flour. You have 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. You have 1/2 of a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. And I think that's it. Did we get all of that? Yeah. So, and let me give you just a side note on this. You might see me looking up as I'm doing this and telling you all these instructions. One thing I learned, which has been a lifesaver at Big Family Homestead while we were up there for Thanksgiving, the coolest idea, so simple but so useful. Krista takes just an alligator clip and she has one of these, the little 3M connectors that you can put on any kind of surface, and it has the little like gluey kind of sticky substance on the back. And what you do is you put it on there, and then at any time you can pull it and it'll come right off. It doesn't peel away at any of the paint or anything like that. So we put a hook up here, we got alligator clips, and then she has all of her bread recipes. Well, I also had my recipe that I've printed out for the pumpkin roll, and so it's right here so that I can look right at it as I'm mixing. So it's a really cool little tip that I learned from Krista, so thanks, Krista. So now that we have this all folded in, let's go ahead and put the flour, the baking powder, the cinnamon, and the salt in. I went ahead and measured those out. So that's the baking powder, the cinnamon, and the salt. So we'll go ahead and toss those in there. Make sure it all gets in there. Okay, and go ahead and kind of gently fold that in. And then we'll put the flour in. Make sure that your baking powder gets mixed in good, because the worst thing is when you go to bite into your pumpkin roll cake and to get a mouthful of baking powder. Ask Blaze, he's not very fond of that. It's not the tastiest thing, so make sure that you get it all mixed together. You don't have any lumps or anything. Okay, and then last but certainly not least, our flour. And that's 3/4 of a cup of flour. Seems like it would need more than that, but it's just 3/4 of a cup. And we go and mix all of that together, and now we're kind of getting to a cakey consistency. Pretty neat. Now, this is where I was talking before. If you go ahead and get your cake sheet ready, as soon as you have this mixed, you can pour it straight on. So that's why I like to do that ahead of time. We're just going to go ahead and mix this, get it nice and get the flour folded into the mixture, and then we'll pour it and get ready to put it in the oven. Okay, now one side note, something I forgot to tell you. When you get your parchment paper onto your baking pan, go ahead and lightly dust with some confectioner sugar. This is not to be mistaken with the measurement that you need for the icing. This is something totally different. So just a little bit into a sifter, colander, something like that, and just lightly dust the parchment paper. Okay. Now that that's done, let's go ahead and pour our batter onto the parchment paper. Okay, and I'm of course one of those people that I love to have everything out of the bowl if I can. That's why I love to use stainless steel and a spatula. That ensures you get a good portion of it off of the bowl. Of course, then my kids don't like me very much because then I don't have anything left for them to snack on and tell me just how wonderful of a mom I am for making their favorite treat. Okay, so now that we've got that done, you can take your spatula if you want and kind of paint it out onto the parchment if you want. One thing I'll end up doing when I get it somewhat even is I end up dropping the pan onto a flat surface so that it evens it all out. That's pretty loud. Just a warning now, so you know. But you can go ahead and spread it out here. And I don't know if you could tell, but there are little bits that are fuller than others. So once I get this spread out pretty good, we'll flatten it out. So I like to kind of give it a little jiggle and then drop it. Drop it a couple times. And that kind of evens everything out. And that way you don't have, when you get finished baking it and you pull it out, you won't see one side is like this thick and then the other side is like paper thin. So that kind of helps to even it out. Okay, so now I think we're ready. It's time to put it in the oven. Hopefully you remembered, just like I did, to put it on 375 and it should be ready and hot, ready for you to bake. So we're gonna put this in for about 10 minutes. And what you'll do is check, you can check with a toothpick, with a knife, whatever, to make sure that it's cooked all the way through. It won't take long because of how thin it is. And in the meantime, what we'll do is start working on our icing. Okay, so now for my favorite part, the icing. First thing you want to make sure that you do when you start this recipe is to make sure you've pulled out your butter and your cream cheese, because you want them to soften in order for you to get a good consistent icing. So the first thing we need, 2 tablespoons of butter. Now, one thing I'll tell you that I have learned, make sure that the bowl that you use is not a shallow bowl. You need a deep bowl so that you don't start throwing all of your ingredients around. Next thing, 8 ounces of cream cheese. Go ahead, we'll peel that. Put that in the bowl. Now I always like to have a spatula around, which I don't see it, but that's okay. This should fall out pretty quick, pretty easy. Okay, put your cream cheese in the bowl. Okay. And I like to kind of cut that up just a little bit with your blender or your hand mixer. Mix up the butter and the cream cheese just a little bit. The next thing you'll need is 1 cup of confectioner's sugar, 10x sugar, powdered sugar, whatever you call it. Go ahead and dump that in there. That around, and then the last thing is 3/4 of a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Go ahead and dump that in there. And again, I kind of like to mix it around just a little bit before I start blending it because of that powdered sugar. Powdered sugar starts going and it looks like it's snowing in here. So start it off on a very low speed. I think my hand mixer is starting to go on me. It only knows 1 speed. Go. Okay, and then you're going to whip that up until everything is mixed together. Okay. And you want to do that until it's nice and blended together and smooth. And I'll show you what that looks like. When it's done. That's what it's going to look like. Now we're ready to get the cake out and start spreading the icing here pretty soon. But first we have to let it cool off a little bit, and then we're going to roll the form. So come back for that. All right, so the timer went off on the oven. We tested the cake and it's good to go. The knife went in, knife came out, no cake on it, so it's done. We've pulled it out, put it onto a wire rack and allow it to cool just a few minutes. Now that it's cool, I'm going to take it off the parchment paper onto a new piece of parchment paper that, again, we're going to lightly dust with confectioner's sugar. And this is the part that is another part that's really important, because this is what helps you to make the roll. So you're going to take your cake out and flip it onto your other piece of parchment paper. Now, when I was using the pan before, this part was always a headache because you weren't sure if the cake stuck to the pan. Sometimes you had to get a spatula and scrape up underneath it, and the cake wasn't always very pretty. But here with the parchment paper, all you do is peel off the paper. I mean, I can't thank John enough for this little bit of advice, because this has made making pumpkin rolls so much easier cleanup wise in our house, because we don't just make one pumpkin roll. We will make 5, 6, 7 pumpkin rolls at a time. And so having to take that pan and keep washing it and hope that it's dry so that it didn't stick and that the oil didn't get on it, it's a mess. So with this, I just take this, throw it away. I've got my new piece of parchment paper, and now we're just going to roll it up. So you see I have a little bit of extra on either side. And the reason why I do that, I like to fold it over just a little bit to be able to give a little bit of definition on that first part that you roll. And then basically what you do is you fold that first part in and you just very gently roll your cake. And then when you're done, it'll be a roll just like that. And now you're going to allow it to dry that way. Okay, so this is the part where you kind of wait just a little while before you start assembling your roll. So we're going to put that back on a wire rack and let it completely dry and cool down. It'll probably be about 15-20 minutes. All right, so now on to the final part. Our cake is cool, and we're going to unroll it. And now if we did this right, it should kind of roll a little bit on its own, and we did. So what we're gonna do is take that icing and put it on there. And I usually just take the big glob and put it in the middle first, and then we'll just spread it out evenly. Now, when you're spreading it out, you don't want to, if you know this end is gonna be the middle, you don't want to spread your icing out all the way to the edge on this side, because as we roll it, it will naturally start to roll off to the edge there. So you want to concentrate more on this side and spreading it as evenly as you kind of can get it. Just spread it out. You want to get it close, kind of close to your edges, because when you have these rolls, it's going to be the whole length of the roll needs to have the icing on it. That's what makes it taste so yummy. But again, not real thick on the edges, because again, once you start rolling it, it will push out the sides if you're not careful. Okay, so you see, I leave that last little bit without icing. And you'll see as we roll it, all right, so now we're ready to roll it back up. So what you can do is start with the paper just a little bit, but now you're going to start to peel away the sides from where it was before. And so you'll just very gently start to roll that forward. And as you roll, you'll peel off the cake from the parchment paper. Now you will lose a little bit to the parchment paper, but not nearly as much of a cleanup as you would if you were doing this on a towel. Okay, now, and there you have it. Now, what we'll do is we'll put this in the refrigerator for about an hour and let it kind of form back up. And then we'll cut it into 8 pieces. And basically what you do is cut it in half, cut each one of those halves in half, and then cut each one of those halves in half, and you'll have 8 even pieces. So, well, this was the first one of the year. Hopefully each one after that will get that much better. Thank you for joining us today. And like always, have a nice day. Okay, so the very first step is to separate our eggs. Now, I don't know about your house, but at our house, there are 2 things that are a waste of money. Garlic separator, no, garlic presses, just kidding. Garlic separators, because I don't know what that is. That's your hands. You pull them apart, peel them. And egg presses, because man, those things, they are really a waste. Can you imagine an egg press? That would be really bad. Okay, so our very first step is going to be to separate the eggs. We need the whites in one bowl and the yolks in another. Now, I don't know about at your household, but for us, there are 2 things in the kitchen that are just a waste of time and space. And that's a garlic press and an egg separator. Most people will use the yolk to separate out the eggs, but I am notorious for getting the shells into what?
What do you use to separate the egg?
What did I say, the egg?
Yolk.
Oh no, I didn't. Are you serious? I said the yolk.
Yeah, you did. I was really going out the door and I used the yolk to separate the egg. Wait a minute. Maybe I heard that wrong and maybe she was saying something I don't know.
Please stop. I said, what? He goes,